Welcome back, everybody, to What Really Matters. I'm Tablet Deputy Editor Jeremy Stern with you in Los Angeles. I'm here, as always, with Walter Russell Mead, Tablet news writer, Global View columnist at the Wall Street Journal, and distinguished fellow at Hudson. Let's start with this week's news. First story of the week. President Joe Biden is set to block Nippon Steel's acquisition of U.S. steel after his administration concluded that the $15 billion transaction posed a national security risk that could not be mitigated by the U.S. and Japanese groups. Biden's decision, which is expected in the coming days, comes as Kamala Harris steps up her campaigning for blue-collar votes in Pennsylvania, a swing state that could decide November's election. Speaking in Pennsylvania this week, Harris said the iconic Pittsburgh-based U.S. steelmaker should remain, quote, American-owned and American-operated. Walter, news or faux news?
Oh, it's news, all right. It's news that American politics is moving in a sharply negative direction, and that all of us are going to be enjoying lower living standards, more economic problems, and weaker alliances in the face of a challenging global world environment. There is no rational reason why a Japanese company should not be allowed to buy this facility. In fact, it's likely that more jobs will be lost if the plant cannot be sold. But in any case, it just shows a kind of an utter abandonment of strategic thinking. Now let's hope that our Japanese friends will simply sort of say, well, everybody's got their little stupid sides and we're going to move on and we're not going to be dismayed by that. I think there's a good chance. But it simply underlines the basic horrifying reality that in the face of a serious challenge from China, the United States does not have a serious economic policy, even for our closest friends in Asia.
I mean, one of the interesting things there is that the Biden administration has spent the past 3 years, as far as I can tell, promoting the policy of, quote, friendshoring, which aims to contain China by forging closer trade and supply chain and manufacturing ties with U.S. allies like Japan. So what do you think this means for the strategy of friendshoring? Was it kind of all PR and optics all along, and all of this is just going to be subject to American domestic politics?
No, I mean, look, I think it's a horrible decision and a stupid decision, and it demonstrates a broken policy process. But I don't think actually it undercuts friendshoring, because friendshoring is about trying to move production from non-friendly countries to friendly countries. And the question of whether a facility that's already in the U.S. should be owned by an American company or owned by a Japanese company doesn't really affect the friendshoring debate one way or another. So I think that's just people trying to, like, what do the Greeks used to say? Pile Pelion on Asa, put two mountains on top of each other and make something actually bigger than in fact it is.
All right, our second story. A former aide to two New York governors was charged this week with acting as an illegal agent of the Chinese government who used her state positions to subtly advance Beijing's agenda in exchange for financial benefits worth millions of dollars. Linda Sun, who held numerous posts in New York state government, including Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Kathy Hochul and Deputy Diversity Officer for former Governor Andrew Cuomo, was arrested Tuesday morning along with her husband at their $4 million home on Long Island. Federal prosecutors said Sun, at the request of Chinese officials, blocked representatives from the Taiwanese government from having access to the governor's office and shaped New York governmental messaging, including during the pandemic, to align with the priorities of the Chinese government. Walter, is this news or faux news?
Oh, I think it's news. Bad news, but news. I'm interested, in a sense, in the decision to identify and prosecute her. Sun Tzu used to say, and I think Machiavelli had the same idea, that actually you probably, once you've identified an enemy spy, the smart thing to do is leave them in place, because now you know who they are. And it's a fairly safe bet that if you catch this one, they'll send someone that you don't know. So possibly it would have been smarter to try to use this knowledge. But again, there's a calculus going on inside the government at any given moment. But I think it does point to something. As the geopolitical tensions ratchet up, things are going to change. And one of the things that's going to change is that we're going to see much more public interest and official interest in the ties that Americans have to foreign governments, and particularly, obviously, to hostile governments. The thing that, in a way, and that worries me to some degree, because I think in many cases it will go overboard. We can all think back to the McCarthyite era, or to the internment of Japanese Americans in World War II, when it all just sort of got completely out of hand. But it's also a little bit, it is reminiscent of what went on in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in the U.S., when in the 30s you had a sort of large climate of opinion that was kind of pro-Soviet, pro-communist. During World War II, that's reinforced. They were our allies. Stalin was our allies. So there were a lot of people working in the government. Many had concealed communist affiliations, who didn't think to themselves, I'm being a traitor to the United States by giving this piece of information to a Soviet ally. But then after the war, and as the Cold War began to heat up, so to speak, or cool down, that you suddenly found that you were in the position of being deeply compromised by what is now a hostile government, and very much liable to prosecution, exposure, ruin of your career. And I think in the past 30 years, where U.S.-Chinese relations were on the whole fairly good, there were a lot of close commercial contacts, a lot of people to people, and at a certain point, encouraged by the U.S. government, by private corporations, by universities. And so you have these ties. Now, these ties that exist begin to look a little bit different in a new climate. So I think people who are in that position, who never intentionally acted against the interests of the United States, or tried to sort of prefer the interests of a foreign power to the U.S., need to start thinking about how do they kind of render their accounts at this point, and how do they exit, how do they move from one lane to another lane, because I think that these kinds of pressures are only going to increase.
All right, final story of the week. Hamas's execution of 6 hostages, including one American citizen, has, quote, called into question Hamas's willingness to do any kind of a deal, according to a senior White House official who spoke to Axios. According to the report, one of the main questions raised at a Monday meeting between President Biden, Vice President Harris, and their security team was, quote, whether there is a hostage release and ceasefire in Gaza deal Hamas would ever agree to. Others raised the concern that Washington could pressure Israel to abandon security control of the Philadelphia corridor, quote, only to discover that Hamas doesn't agree to other parts of the deal. Walter, news or faux news?
But in one sense, it's faux news, because, my gosh, news flash, Washington says deal is imminent. Both sides have agreed. And then it turns out that, well, except for like the main crucial points, they do agree. And so then we go back, and it's another round of negotiations and so on and so forth. The real problem here is that if you're at all serious about Israeli security, what you're thinking of is, we want to deal with Hamas that will get the remaining hostages out, which will make it then easier to go in and just kill the remaining Hamas leaders. And the Hamas leaders have to be thinking, well, these Israeli hostages are my only security against the Israelis doing exactly that. So, I would only think about giving them up if there was some kind of ironclad international guarantee, something that I could believe in, that Israel, once the hostages leave, my human shields, I get rid of my human shields, the Israelis won't just come back. That is actually very hard to negotiate. And particularly when, again, it's very hard to think of the rational case why Israel wouldn't try to eliminate and punish the Hamas leaders who engineered this whole attack and have led this horrific war. And on the other side, why Hamas wouldn't be struggling for both the physical survival of its leadership and its political survival in Gaza. So the Israel-Hamas agreement is a bit like the two-state, the Palestinian debate over a final agreement between Israelis and Palestinians. it all looks good until you get down to the really tough things at the end, which in fact are the most important ones. I think, again, the Biden folks want at least an appearance of progress. They would love a nice ceasefire. Hostages go home. How perfect that would be as the election comes, quiet in the Middle East. Oh, they would love it. Failing that, maybe the next best thing is, peace is just around the corner. We're leading these negotiations. It's kind of just as the two-state negotiations always serve as good political cover for an American administration. To the pro-Israel people say, we're doing our best to ensure Israel's security. And to the less pro-Israel folks out there, you can say, we are really working hard to push Israel to make a fair agreement with the Palestinians. So now this thing of trying to push the two sides together toward an agreement becomes less necessarily a diplomatic path to get something done than a way to manage a political situation which otherwise threatens to spin out of control. Hopefully they'll get an agreement. But I have to say, so far, I haven't seen much out there to diminish my natural skepticism.
We talked last week about Netanyahu. What did you make of the blame that he took personally from President Biden, from large swaths of the Israeli public, from officials in Europe for the massacre of the hostages? I mean, from what I can tell, this move worked out pretty well for Hamas, right? The murder of the hostages put the pressure back on Israel to make a deal. It destabilized the country for several days. What did you make of it?
Well, first, actually, I'd say, Jeremy, that's a bit faux news. World blames Bibi has no effect on Israeli policy. That's a cliche at this point. And, did it really destabilize Israel for a couple of days? The same tens of thousands of people who've gone out, and been marching at regular intervals for 2 years are out again, doing it again. Did it stop the military operations in Gaza? Did it collapse the economy? Did it create some kind of major change in Israeli society? No, it didn't. So, again, there's a lot of performative politics here. And it is in the interest of every cheap two-bit lazy Western statesman to throw all the blame on Bibi. It's just so terrible what that monster is doing. And the monster kind of expects it because he's dealt with these people before. And his core support is not really damaged by this. Doesn't change really his politics. Now, that said, obviously, when 6 people are murdered in cold blood by a bunch of fanatics and thugs, that makes people angry in Israel and in other places. And it does sort of remind Israelis, we're not in a great situation here. And who was prime minister when the Hamas people came over the border from Gaza in the first place? Gosh, and who had been prime minister on and off for years and years before that? So it does remind people that Bibi was there, that this is a huge mess and that Bibi will not escape some historical responsibility for that mess. But it's kind of all baked into the cake at this point, as far as I can see.
All right, that does it for the news this week. Let's have the big conversation. So earlier this week, Walter, Tucker Carlson published what turned out to be a hugely viral interview with Daryl Cooper, an amateur historian and the host of the Mead podcast. In a part of the interview that went particularly viral, Cooper claimed that Winston Churchill, not Adolf Hitler, was the chief villain of World War II for refusing German peace offers in the summer and fall of 1940. Cooper, with Tucker's assent, also attributed Churchill's stubbornness to his having been put in place by, quote, Zionist financiers and a media complex that wanted to drag America into war. He also explained that the Nazis' mass killings of Jews and others was the result of accidental failure of logistics, similar to Israel's failure to adequately care for civilians in Gaza. Now, one of the stranger elements of this whole saga has been watching eminent historians try to like refute Cooper's claims point by point by citing historical documents and so forth, as if that's a game they can win. So I don't want to ask you to do that. I mostly want to zoom out and examine this phenomenon from 30,000 feet. I mean, I guess, first of all, why do you think Tucker inviting like his 9th consecutive anti-Semitic guest on his show to make crank claims about Churchill and Hitler, why did it strike such a chord this time? I mean, between the number of people who apparently liked the interview and those who hated it, we're still talking about total viewers in like the tens of millions. So what's going on here, and what do you think it means?
Well, on the theory that Tucker Carlson cares more about his ratings and visibility than anything else, certainly explains why he's doing this. I don't like to, I've never met Mr. Carlson, so I don't want to, sort of try to claim to read his mind. It's quite possible that what he believes is that he has a vision for America that is so important and so positive that it's absolutely essential to all of us that Tucker Carlson become elevated as a greater and greater thought leader and ultimately perhaps political leader. And if you have to do a few opportunistic, nasty little things along the way, well, what world leader hasn't, and haven't we all read Machiavelli about how you have to do these things? So I can construct an image of Mr. Carlson in which in his own mind he's doing this as a sane and serious moral actor. And let's hope for the sake of his soul that's the way he's operating. Or it's just possible he's chasing the clicks and chasing the dollars and is kind of so entranced, enthralled by the concept of celebrity that he's willing to throw all decency, all morality, all intelligence aside to do something which I think most people who know him say he's far too intelligent to actually believe in. But I can't tell you what that's about. But it can say, I think we can try to put a little bit of perspective historically on this. We hate Churchill. We think Hitler, got a bad rap or something. Pat Buchanan's views of World War II were not that far different. And you go back beyond Pat Buchanan at the time of the war itself, there were a lot of Americans, right up until Pearl Harbor, and some even after, who really thought the United States had no business in World War II, and who thought, and they were right about this, that Great Britain understood that the only way it could be sure to win the war was to get the United States into the war, and so it was going to do everything it could do. And that a lot of big American economic and financial institutions agreed that Britain's survival was necessary for their own economic position, but also for the United States, the safety and security of the United States. They were right about this, by the way. But people who didn't see it that way could see, the whole evil establishment, these horrible people, they're trying to drag America, and they dragged us into World War I for absolutely no reason, just to save Britain. Now they're going to drag us into World War II for the same reason. And really, how bad are the Germans? I mean, we can see this in our own lifetime where, there are all kinds of people, poor Putin, he's, being forced into war by NATO expansion, and there are all these people trying to drag us into a confrontation. We can see, poor Iran, misunderstood. They're trying to drag America into it. And you will certainly even hear people say, poor China. It's really just trying to build itself up, and poor America being dragged into this. So, these are sentiments that people have. They're not, generally speaking, the people who view these are not the most well-versed people in international relations, not the people who really have a deep sense of how the world works. But there's lots of folks like that. And, they have their ideas and they express their ideas. We're living at a time, too, when the sort of establishment, so to speak, is policing speech harder than I think I've ever seen in my lifetime. And so you have people, sort of trying to cancel people on both sides of the Israel-Palestine issue in American colleges and universities. You have people, trying to silence Republicans from saying, "Yay, I love Trump. I love Trump." We are seeing, so in this kind of atmosphere, you're going to have a distrust of the establishment and kind of a paranoia that can project itself backwards in time. So that up until he actually, up until the debate, everybody said that, the entire establishment press, Joe Biden, greatest president since FDR, magnificent. You're a horrible human being. You should be destroyed if you don't recognize the genius of Joe Biden. And we don't, no serious person should run against him for the nomination because he's so damn good. And then flip, he must go. And if you think he could stay, you're going to hand the country over to Trump and you're the most evil person. And Kamala Harris goes from like really mediocre seeming vice president to the voice of joy, the hope, the sort of entire media establishment turning like fish swimming in a school, but not just expressing their ideas, voicing this condemnation of everybody who disagrees. This heightens people's distrust of establishment. So you look back and you think, well, gosh, if somebody says, maybe it was the same thing in the 1940s that I see today, this notion of a well-drilled media militia policing opinion, enforcing political decisions, et cetera, et cetera. So in some ways, I see this as a manifestation of the rapidly declining trust people have in their current contemporary establishment, and then by extension to the establishments on back through history. Now, there's another strand to this because you have people who, there were people, as we said, in the 30s and 40s who actually kind of sympathized with certainly the fascists. A lot of people, a lot of very respectable Catholics thought that what Franco was doing in Spain was defending Catholicism from murderous atheistical tyrants. They weren't entirely wrong, by the way. The sense that as the Communist Party gained influence in Spain, the anti-clericalism, murdering priests and that sort of thing was real. So, and then Hitler was seen as like, well, more distasteful than Mussolini, even than Franco. But if the alternative is a Stalin-dominated Europe, and at this point in time, objectively, Stalin had mass murdered far more people than Hitler and the Nazis had. So you can see people sort of saying, like, why is it suddenly the most moral thing and the one and only meaningful test of your morality is to be willing to align with the Soviet Union against Germany and Italy and Spain? So that vision kind of went subterranean. It was socially frowned upon, and you said that kind of thing, and you didn't get invited to nice parties, and didn't really, sort of your career was capped, especially in politics. So you kind of learned to keep that sort of thing to yourself. But now again, as the wheels are coming off establishment power, people are able to say things that maybe in the past some of them thought, and then as these things get said and the internet propagates these things very quickly, all kinds of people are going, oh wait, that who may have never really thought about this stuff before in their lives, saying, oh yeah, I see, yeah, they want us to think this, that's how they are. And then you throw into this, on top of all of this, anti-Semitism, which is very much a part of obviously our discussions of Nazism. And so we see, again, as people are losing faith, we've talked about this before, as people have lost some faith in the American dream, the American vision of a multi-ethnic, multi-confessional, national people, of whom American Jews are a full and equal part, along with a lot of other groups. As that vision loses its hold, anti-Semitism on the left and the right is creeping back. And so the anti-Semitism, anti-establishmentism, revisionism of 30s and 40s history begins to all sort of resurface. This is not a good story to tell, but I think we should not feel that the primary problem here is that a bunch of not particularly well balanced people listen to an interview on the internet and start rehabilitating a bunch of very stale conspiracy theories about World War II. It's disagreeable, but again, the state of our society, where so many people feel alienated in so many ways from sort of what we once might have thought of as central cultural and political norms and values, that they're wandering off, into sort of the fences are down and the sheep and the cows and the donkeys are wandering where they will over the hills. The problem is not that Tucker Carlson is getting a big audience for this stuff. The problem is that we've reached a point socially where the collapse of trust, the collapse of a sense of common purpose and destiny has left us vulnerable, not just to this form of, and I won't hesitate here, evil, but to many other forms. And at a time when our enemies abroad are looking to exploit any weakness that they can find to further their own designs.
One final question. There was a lot of hand-wringing this week from professional historians, including ones on the right, about the explosive popularity of history podcasts and history substacks from amateur historians with no professional training, and many of whom seem to have stumbled on, as you say, stale, old conspiracy theories from decades ago. Does this kind of ecosystem around how people write and consume history worry you, or is this just an inevitable outgrowth of the internet, and we'll just have to kind of be along for the ride?
Well, I, for one, and I'm sure you would agree with me here, Jeremy, we hope nobody would ever listen to podcasts featuring uncredentialed people pontificating on historical subjects. Let's remind our audience here that I have a BA in English literature, and that's it as far as formal credentials. So I'm as quacky as any other quack on the internet, and there have been times when folks in the Historians Guild would have loved to have me shut up. That's not really the problem. Again, I say, how many of our historians have been right? When you have something like the 1619 Project, or, sort of various progressive forms of quack history out there, and the historical society, historical establishment seems to be embracing every stupid fashion that sweeps through the intelligentsia generally, uncritically, without, sort of fighting back against it. Well, it just collapses public confidence in historians. I would say if you're a historian, and there's some great historians in this country, writers that I have admired for years, young emerging voices that I am learning from all the time. History, among the liberal arts in our day, history is in far better health than some. The answer is not ban podcasts or wring your hands over the fact that people listen to bad podcasts. The answer is good historians think harder about how to get your message to the public. And God bless you and further your work as you get out there. You can only fight bad history with good history.
All right, that does it for the big conversation. Let's end on the tip of the week. Another reader request, Walter, this week from Ava in Virginia, who wrote in to say, quote, "The New York Times recently published its 100 best novels of the 21st century so far. What are your favorite novels of the last quarter century?"
Well, I'm not going to be able to give you 100. And honestly, I think that question is kind of premature, in that almost all novels are deservedly forgotten very soon after they're published. I would suggest to readers, go back and look in like 1920 at the bestseller lists or lists of best books. Look and see what people said in 1950 about the best novels, again, the best-selling novels, whatever. And what you'll find is just tedious stuff that no one in their right mind could work their way through now. Not even professional scholars of literature read most of this drivel. Okay? This is one of the reasons I would rather read old books than new books. There's been a bit of sorting process. Same with music. It's like all the bad writer, the really, really terrible musicians, and there were a lot of them who sort of wrote music in the style of, say, Mozart and Haydn. They've all gone away. And so what you've got left is good stuff. If you don't believe me, go listen sometime, if you can find a copy, to the musical works of Frederick the Great of Prussia. All right. And they're sort of like classical. They are also deeply lame. And that's what most fiction is. So I don't think anybody now can give you a good list of, they can give you, in a sense, they'll give you a list of the books that most align with the temporary and trivial cultural ethos of this moment. What a hip young New Yorker writer thinks of at this moment as cool. All right, I can give you that list, or they can give you that list. I can't give you that list. They can give you that list. Or what a slightly more mature New York Times editor who is well aware of all the stuff that's going on, what they think is sort of fit and proper and decent and whatever. Blah! All right. But I then said, okay, well, now, you can say all of that stuff, but think, Walter, as a challenge. What's a good novel that you've read that was written in the 21st century? And I have to, one did come to mind, The Magician by Comte Toybin, which is a lot, sort of fictionalized life of Thomas Mann. Viewers of this podcast know that I'm quite fond of the novels of Thomas Mann. And it was a lot of fun to see this version of his life, an attempt to imagine the mind behind these novels and to connect them in some ways with the life. I thought it was serious. I thought it was thoughtful. I thought it was fair. And I thought it was really, really well written. So there are good novels coming out. The trouble is, in any one year, there's not that many good novels coming out. And the novels that everybody are talking the most about tend to be the novels that most reflect the sort of ethos of the time. So that literary fashion and fashion in clothes is a lot closer than people think. And the look that just seems so hip and now and really just right today, by next spring, everybody's going, oh, cringe. That's what most of these things are going to be sooner than you might think. Cringe.
All right, there you have it. Thanks to our producer, Noam Bloom. Thanks to Will Cummings at Hudson and my co-host, Walter Russell Mead. I'm Jeremy Stern. We'll see you next week. And until then, please go rate and review us. This helps other people find the show.